So, the Dragon Ball manga is in a bit of an awkward place right now. Let's talk about it. For anyone following both the channel and the recent happenings on the printed pages of the official Dragon Ball Super comic, the superhero arc has finally had a proper ending, but with a twist. We are having a small story here involving Carmine trying to send Saiyaman X1 and 2, that's Goten and Trunks by the way, after Son Gohan, not being at all aware of their familial connections. What's even funnier is that the boys do not recognize him as part of Red Ribbon Pharmaceuticals. And maybe, to be fair, they haven't had a chance to properly see the guy, although you could also argue that Pan probably would have talked about a guy with a weird haircut and then put two and two together, so a comedy of errors ensues. Meanwhile, Vegeta is training with Broly, having a very good feeling after his victory over Kakarot, and he constantly rubs his face in it, whilst everyone becomes aware more of Gohan Beast's power. Goku wants to fight strong guys, but they have in fact two strong guys at home. We do have, of course, the whole Black Frieza peril hanging in the air, eventually turning up, but honestly, it's kind of hard to tell which route the whole thing will take. We know that Toriyama has his own plans for the three Saiyans, that's Goku, Vegeta, Broly, and of course the Emperor of the Universe. Would Toyotaro be allowed to tell his own story? It's hard to say, now that Ioku is his own faction in the world of complicated, intricate details related to Dragon Ball's future and publishing rights, more bickering, but if he won't be allowed to make major breakthroughs in this department, then, dare I say it, maybe he could focus on expanding the world? One of the things that we enjoyed throughout the years in the Super Manga era were those little lore additions enhancing what we already have. Like seeing the planets of some of the gods of destruction, or some more little tidbits about Namekian culture that we weren't privy to before now. Most of the stinkers in the manga tend to come from an over-reliance on basic fan service and the need to make Goku more special than he already is, aka Bardock's wish in granola, but honestly, the most fun that the manga happens to have and happens to be is when it takes us to some places, even the mundane ones. It was really cool to see Goten and Trunks at high school, to meet their friends and peers, and to see how they interact with regular human youth. And of course Goten being absolutely great at it. And one of the best things about the Granola saga was the crazy chase that Goku and Gas had in chapters 81 and 82, seeing different peoples and worlds reacting to their over-the-top duel, and also, of course, fighting on trains. During the Moro saga, we personally loved to see Pui Pui's planet of Zune and its inhabitants that weren't allied with Barbady, that they weren't all bad guys, that Pui Pui was just a specific jerk. Not to mention the usage of both Yardratian designs, which has been welcomed rather enthusiastically by fans connecting the world of Dragon Ball Online. And of course, Toriyama recycling. Because in his younger years, Toriyama wasn't much of a careful world builder. He made the story first and the world second, which honestly should not be put against him. That was just his style, and the whole reasoning behind the Dragon World ever existing. It's only much later into the series when we started to see layers forming, and quite recently, when it seems that he wants to kind of sort things out before he retires for good and disappears into the ether, especially when it comes to Saiyan lore and history. We might not like everything that's been introduced since Minus, but the fact is that Broly's Saiyans stop to feel that one note and become slightly more believable. Broly is good now. Wholly good. Toyotaro, well, okay. The dude came from being a fan comic creator for quite a while before he started to draw on the official series, and of course, the Dragon Ball Heroes line. And he's had a lot of ideas and theories of his own. Not all of them particularly hit the mark though, especially regarding certain white-haired characters that he created for his most famous fan manga. And by studying those, it's kind of easy to see what he likes. Gohan, the dragons, Roshi, superhero stuff, and god-related monologuing villains. Some of that stuff we can see giving some shape and form to the later things in Super, like Zamasu having a lot to do with his earlier works, despite him being a collaboration between Toriyama and his student. You can easily see the teenage edgelord within Zamasu. But still, he is a fan, and he wants to see this world grow and expand because That's what he wanted when he was younger, as did everybody else. He's living the dream. But expanding the Dragon World is not just about adding new fantastical locales and places just for the sake of it. It's also allowing for some character interactions to occur. And honestly, we kinda loved how the Broly Vegeta training sequence went in Chapter 101. How they keep it up with him as being the fighting therapist Vegeta, as we like to call him. He did that with Kaba, he did that with Granola, and he's now doing it with Broly. And it seems to be working. Theorists forgetting about Gohan might be just a silly gag, but honestly, he is a 10 billion year old divine entity at this point. Of course he's going to forget certain mortals because they're interchangeable for him. They only live, what, for like 80 years at a push? They're about as fleeting and unimportant to him as most of the bugs that we encounter in our day-to-day lives, which only shows how highly he does respect the likes of Goku, Vegeta, and yes, even Frieza. And let's not forget Bulma for her delicious food. Now these little moments really build up those characters. The prince is in a good mood for once and playfully taunts Kakarot, to the point where the latter starts to be a little bit annoyed about it. And that's quite something. It's something that the manga pulls off pretty well. Maybe that should be the focus of the manga going forward. If you cannot hope, for the time being, of having your own powerful sagas that will be adapted into even more epic animated projects, maybe instead focus on just growing the world and these characters. I know that that might not be realistic, but honestly, those little things that we witnessed perked my interest immensely, much more than anything that the manga had done for the longest time. Because at the end of the day, it gives you that feeling of the story that it's moving along, you know? Of course, Goku wants to go back to Earth and check out the likes of Gohan Beast. We will probably have a battle between Goku and Gohan. Like, if that mini-saga was just about Piccolo, Gohan, Vegeta, Goku, and Broly sparring in their new forms, that could easily be enough. That's what a lot of people want. With some of the characters witnessing them and being inspired to go on their own paths, yeah? I would really love for Goten and Trunks to realize that they kind of need to become their own people and figure something out for either themselves or to improve the likes of Gotenks so they're not incredibly grating. Yes, the mothers have not been particularly happy about their involvement, but then again, if another danger does pop up, they might be needed as something more than just being a comic relief. That, and they are starting to become quite competent as superheroes, so that might push them to go elsewhere. I don't know if they could have a manga-specific form, but honestly, we still have Ultra Ego, something that would spread like hotcakes in official merchandise, if it had any. Once again, we touch upon the fact that this whole awkward situation with the manga is caused by some inner power plays, bickering. And we assume that the events regarding Iyoku and his power play creating Capsule Corporation Tokyo are just the tip of a pretty complicated iceberg going on at the likes of Shueisha. A mixture of understandable concerns mixed with corporate nonsense and dithering. So if the manga wants to take a step back, there are ways to make it cool, you know? Every time Victory Uchida and Toyotaro try to hype us up for the next chapter, it comes across as a bit like, "How do you do, fellow kids?" and "Hey, we're still cool and relevant, right?" And it always plays out the same. It was particularly bad in the superhero saga because we kind of knew how it was going to end, and honestly, it felt kind of jarring. And they were sort of hyping us up for stuff we'd already seen. Maybe it's a cultural barrier or something, but at least on our part on the internet, there isn't a lot of hype being generated, and we're being told that there is a lot of hype being generated, but there clearly isn't. And according to Akio Yoku's recent statements, Dragon Ball being a global franchise seems to be a priority. Finally. It's hard to say if Shueisha is sharing that same sentiment, or they will want to constantly focus on the Japanese market first, remembering their complicated relationship. But we also live in a world where everybody gets a new chapter at roughly the same time, with the likes of Brandon Bovier and Caleb Cook working tirelessly to deliver a new chapter for English-speaking audiences around the world at the same time as the Japanese people do. So there is that, but still, it really makes me wonder if the current situation is caused by Shueisha's inaction or Yoku's ambitions getting out of hand, or both. And the manga has kind of become the scapegoat and the victim of the struggle. And, you know, For the medium that has been the most regular provider of Dragon Ball content and sustaining the most diehard of fans, that's quite bad. Now, I remember when That Time I Got Reincarnated as Yamcha was released, that little side manga. It was supposed to shape our expectations towards different types of Dragon Ball content that could be presented by the Dragon Room. I remember they were planning to do like a little spin-off manga about what it was like being the average Frieza Force grunt. That could have been fun. Smaller spin-off manga happening in alternate universes, or allowing some other characters to have their time to shine. But after that Yamcha story, we barely got anything. It's crazy to me that the manga, which started as the source material for everything these days, is sort of like this awkward relative that everybody in the family is kinda ashamed of. It's the black sheep. And there are multiple reasons for that, outside of the quality of the medium. One of the biggest cases, which has been talked about by a lot of the big names in this community, is the awkward release schedule, which gives us more, but also makes the series drag on a little bit. Get it? Dragon Ball? Okay, I'll stop. I am not going to include other issues like the infamous Toyotaro cycle or very scarce advertisements, but in general, you kind of look at the Dragon Ball manga and you've really got that sneaking feeling that Shueisha is releasing the thing mostly because they feel obliged to, that they have to. There is very little pride taken in it as of late, and it's honestly quite baffling. It's the thing that's carrying the franchise right now, because Dragon Ball Super, the manga, just had its 100th chapter. 100th. Back in the day, chapters were 14 to 20 pages long. Nowadays, we are getting things closer to 50 pages, that being the standard. So Super, lengthwise, is around about where the original was at the beginning of the Frieza saga. It's kind of crazy that it's been with us for so long with the break between Granola and Superhero, and we hardly feel it. I feel that one of the most likely culprits is that at some point within the internal struggles, trust me, there seems to have been many of them, there might have been some scuffles regarding the rights of certain elements from the manga. How else do you explain that even the gachas are not pulling the characters from these stories? I understand why the superhero movie did not mention Granola and Moro, but why haven't the games mentioned them? Will Sparking Zero break that trend? Probably not, but it would be a nice change of pace. The silver lining might be that Iyoku and his Capsule Corporation plan are going to be pushing out some projects of theirs, but it seems like he's more interested in the animation and video game side of the franchise rather than the manga. And if he does succeed in pushing out multiple things, the manga will be even less relevant, which is becoming more likely to be the case. The manga just being its own little vestigial tale. And listen, we weren't always kind to the manga, haven't I? And we still stand by our critiques regarding many things that simply just didn't work. That Toyotaro has a little bit of a sketchy relationship with the fandom, and even though he has improved in recent months and his art becoming really impressive, people will still remember stuff from the earlier days. You know what I'm talking about. But still, every single original story has introduced multiple elements that we liked, and that have made the Dragon world a bit of a richer place. In some cases, it made it a very repetitive story, but besides the point, Toriyama is also guilty of this. It's not just about Toyotaro. So we'd rather see it improve or have some decent conclusion than to see it sort of just wither and die and they just forget about it as that weird offshoot that nobody's going to really care about in a few years' time. I'm pretty sure the gacha games are now more popular than it. Heck, maybe even Super Dragon Ball Heroes is. It's hard to say. And on one hand, look, I get it. Nowadays, manga is easily accessible, so people can just get the chapter, read the chapter, and then forget about the chapter the next day, since there are the likes of apps being able to do it. But of course, some people buy prints, they do add them to their collections, or subscribe to the overall services, so that means they get a vast multitude of manga, but that's about it. But to not even have a single piece of official merchandise from the manga? Like, when you look at the earlier series, some of the most obscure characters have merchandise. You can have Cardinal Muchi Muchi's figure, but no official Ultra Ego t-shirt? Or not even a Moro figure? Are you kidding me? Once again, things are complicated because the Roni Rona derailed a lot of the projects going on, but it doesn't seem that anyone is too keen on catching up right now. And in all honesty, the longer they stall, the more irrelevant the content becomes. Is that what they're planning on doing? It's kind of hard to say. But we hope that this year, 2024, is going to be different, better. That the manga will either go somewhere exciting or find its proper footing, whether it will be as the franchise support or by exploring things that the anime won't bother to explore due to time constraints. It is, after all, Dragon Ball's 40th anniversary, and the original manga was the start of it all. It's no longer the same author, of course, and the story has a vastly different feel to it, but it would feel really meaningful if it got the win that it so desperately needs. We know that we would feel more inspired and less grouchy talking about it all the time because it's going places. So yeah, hope is all we got.